Seattle, in the 1990s, was known as an independent coastal city, relatively humble in size and cost, with local coffee houses, a music scene which pushed grunge artists of the 90s to the forefront, elaborate parades and sculptures, and a striking natural landscape. The uniqueness of the city and location and culture fostered creativity and growth, as it drew in younger crowds seeking a lively and affordable community. As local band names like Nirvana and Pearl Jam began making headlines across the country, artists and developers alike took notice of Seattle's budding prospects, and the arrival of major tech conglomerates pushed out the very artistry which had ushered them in.
Jeff Bezos came to Seattle in 1994 during the tech boom with the vision of creating an international web-based bookstore which would eventually grow into the household name Amazon. Originally situated on a small campus, Amazon went from an online bookstore to the world's leading tech conglomerate, selling just about anything one can think of with the click of a button. The downfalls of the economic interconnectedness of our world afforded by Amazon and other tech companies began to rattle Seattle locals as the city rapidly changed. Cost of living increased exponentially, and wealth disparity was ignored in favor of wealthy companies making their way into Seattle. In 1999, Amazon moved into Pacific Towers on Beacon Hill. In the same year, Seattleites made history during the protest of the World Trade Organization, advocating for sustainable environmental conditions, sustainable wages, as well as workers' rights. Sadly, little came of the protests, and Bezos planned the company's expansion into what is today South Lake Union. Pacific Towers was their headquarters up until 2010, when the company uprooted and planted itself in the heart of Seattle. "2007 marked Amazon's announced expansion into South Lake Union, priorly known as Cascade Park. An area once known for the Seattle Times, its pea patch, local businesses, expansive parking lots, warehouses, and reasonable rent prices would soon undergo 12.5 million square feet of development at the hands of Amazon. High-skilled employees make roughly $150,000 annually. This tech money punctured the economy and sent ripples throughout the metro city area. Boarded-up buildings are scattered in pockets around uncanny and eerily sleek skyscrapers, as South Lake Union became one of the fastest developing neighborhoods in the country. Locals attempted to bring attention to the addition of 14 city landmarks in the downtown area as of 2010, with 34 more potential structures in the works. In the late 90s, Seattle residents turned down a proposal to develop the South Lake Union area into the Seattle Commons, out of fear of rising rent prices and the gentrification of the city. Ironically, Amazon and Google purchased that same land several years later and gentrified the city themselves. Developers framed the growth in a positive light, believing there was not much there to begin with. Thus, much of South Lake Union was bulldozed to make way for Amazonia, as coined by the locals. This is not the first time Seattle's culture has been infiltrated. A much more ruinous and extensive process of Western growth came over the land when the Denny Scouts from Indiana landed at Alki Point in 1851, 171 years ago. Colonization of the land was rapid, and by 1865, the Seattle Board of Trustees approved an ordinance that called for the expulsion of all Native Americans in Seattle. Prior to white settlement, the Duwamish tribe sustained the natural landscape for 12,000 years. Inhabitants were violently forced off the land into neighboring tribes and designated land. Western imperialism and the commodification of Duwamish land led to the extrapolation of natural resources and has left the area's original landscape and culture unrecognizable in just 171 years. This is alarmingly minuscule when compared to the Native Americans' time in the region. South Lake Union today is known for Amazon's campus and the Museum of History and Industry, a dark juxtaposition. On November 13, 1911, the Mohi Museum Society then limited to white settlers only, hosted a celebration of the colonizers' arrival in historical cosplay. To this day, there is a notable emphasis placed on Seattle's history post-colonialism, perpetuating the culture of white apathy in regards to white violence and the loss of native culture, which founded the industrial, now tech-centric city as we know it. Quotes and photographs from the Duwamish tribe are posted outside the museum, an abysmal attempt at virtue signaling. Reparations with lasting effect have yet to be made.
The tech boom made waves across Seattle communities, differentially impacting various minority groups living in lower-income housing, particularly in the neighborhoods of South Lake Union, Cap Hill, Beacon Hill, Fremont, the International District, and downtown Seattle. In the Central District, affordability, lively culture, and a strong community made the neighborhood a livable place for the Black community, which made up 80% of the neighborhood's population in the 1970s. As economic inequality worsens, and affluent, often white employees move into the neighborhood, the Black population has dropped extremely fast, now only representing 10% of the neighborhood. The International District, a significant place for the Asian community, saw the displacement of 350 low-income families between 2007 and 2014. Capitol Hill, known for its acceptance of the LGBTQ community, saw an increase in queer hate crimes from 6 in 2011 to 19 in 2012. When comparing the racial makeup of the general population with the racial makeup of the homeless population, a systemic oppressive component is highlighted. The Native American population in Seattle is extremely low at 0.5%, yet they make up 15% of the houseless. Seattle's Black population is 6.8% and makes up 29% of the unhoused. The Latino population is 7.2% and makes up 14% of the unhoused. Multiracial Americans make up 2% of the city and 15% of the unhoused, and Asian Americans make up 2% of the city and 16.3% of the unhoused. In stark contrast, white Americans make up 64.9% of the population and 48% of the unhoused. The differential impact of gentrification on racial minorities mirrors a tradition of white domination upheld since the beginning of violent colonialization and slavery. Inequity is in plain sight, with 7,910 houseless residents in 2006 and 40,000 houseless residents in 2020. Innovative tech relies on the city's diversity and culture, and Amazon's new domain is lacking. South Lake Union's current population is 53% white, 32% Asian, and below 5% for all other racial groups. Seattle has become the third most gentrified city in the country, with housing expenses 109% higher than the national average. Between 2000 and 2022, the population went from 500,000 to 700,000. Longtime residents feel like outsiders walking through their own neighborhoods as the heart of the city fizzles out. With so much change so quickly, where will we grow from here?